Open a channel.
Open a channel.
Open a channel.
Open a channel.
Open a channel to all decks.
You know her from her choreography work on Labyrinth, along with her amazing acting career portraying Dr. Beverly Crusher for 6 seasons on the iconic television program Star Trek The Next Generation, where she also has directed an episode. She also went on to star in 4 Star Trek The Next Generation movies, and now adding to that list, podcaster. Join me in welcoming to Discussing Trek, Gates McFadden. Good morning and welcome. How are you?
I'm really good, Clarence. Nice to catch up with you.
It's great to have you on, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk with us.
Oh, please. I'm so lucky that anyone would want to talk to me, so I'm very grateful.
So before we do get into Trek and talk about your new podcast, I'd like to ask you about your early career. So can you tell me a bit about your fascination with dance and how you got into choreography?
Well, yeah, sure. I didn't know it, actually, until I was really an adult in my 40s, but I apparently have quite a scoliosis in my spine. And I don't know whether my mother was told that or she just so wanted me to be a performer, which she really did. But I started dancing lessons when I was 2.5, seriously. I was doing a little ballet class. It sort of like was ridiculous because we were just pointing our toes and trying to please our moms. But that just continued, and I started taking every form of dance, and I loved it. But while it was very healthy for me to do it because it helped me not be curved enormously, like people didn't suspect that I had such a curvature, I never was going to be able to be a ballerina, for example, because my back, I just couldn't do certain things that people whose body is really primed to be a dancer can do. I could never get my legs shoulder height just because my bones in my hips wouldn't allow it. Things like that. And I did acrobatics, I did backbends and everything, but mine were not as tight as many of the other people who I studied with were. It was like they were contortionists. It was incredible how their backs would move. But that said, when I was 8, my mother started me doing acting lessons, and then I loved that. I loved all the activities I was doing. I loved swimming, I loved music, all of that. But I just kept getting more and more involved in theater and movement of all kinds. And the man I studied with after college, was a theater major in college, but after college I went for 2.5 years to France and studied with a man who basically all of his acting techniques really started with movement and breath and things like that. His name was Jacques Lecoq in Paris. He's deceased now, but it changed my life because we all had to create new things. It wasn't just getting something already written. We had to come up with subjects that were important to us, and we used to have to do hours and hours of observations. We would go to train stations. We would go to hospitals. We would just things of seeing people in. It could be watching how people wait and how you can decide, what's going on, and how one person has a whole other storyline going on that you don't even know about, but you can just tell the different rhythms. So I loved all of that, and we studied Greek tragedy, and I later went on when I was on a lot of theater faculties, like at Brandeis University. I directed some Greek plays. In University of Pittsburgh, I also directed a play I really loved there. It was a different version of Medea. And I'm very interested, even when I built a theater in Los Angeles, which was about 10 years ago. I can't even remember with COVID. It seems like 10 years have just passed. But I wanted to do plays that really dealt with issues and ethics that were really important to me. So we did several plays on racism, and we talked about immigration and just about what we dealt with. There was one play about the Vietnam War and how it's carried through with someone who was a daughter of a Vietnam woman who had a liaison with an American GI, and just how all of this we are blending as a world, which I think is fantastic.
Thank goodness.
It's just thank goodness, right? But it is so fragile. I mean, half of this country is quite racist, or seems to vote that way anyway. So I think that's what I love about theater, and I love about directing, is that you can really explore ideas, and they don't have to always be political or social, but more often than not they are, at least for me. So that's how that all happened. And the Jim Henson thing was just because I had been at so many universities that had very strong theater programs, and I was the one who taught movement for actors and things like that. So that's how Jim had heard of me. Plus, he saw me perform in New York in my first full-time job play, which was Cloud Nine, directed by Tommy Tune, and it was written by Carol Churchill. And it was a very it was wonderful. Like, all men had to play women, one character who was a woman as well as a man, and vice versa. So it was really wonderful. And, when you do that, you hear things in a different way. If I'm playing a man, and I'm doing it well, I'm not doing a stereotype, okay? You actually, when lines come out of someone's mouth, you hear it in a different way, and you think about it in a different way. You notice things. So that's the kind of thing that was happening. And so anyway, he interviewed me, and I had no idea that he had seen me in the play or that he was contemplating using me for Labyrinth. But he tested me on different things for 2 years without my knowledge. It just was, he'd say, can you come in, I want you to come up and look at this Sesame Street thing. And here's a movie, Dream Child. And he brought me to London. I met people. He wanted me to work on the creature parts in this movie called Dream Child. That's really a beautiful movie. And then he left. And so I think that was my trial by fire. It was like, can she sort of run the shop here in terms of getting like the creatures together, the puppeteers together, and the voice actor and the actors, and get a scene shot. And what I did is, I wasn't the director of the film, but I would put like a couple different versions on video, and the director, whose name was Gavin Miller, would say, I like this way, and so that would lead me in the direction he wanted me to go.
Interesting.
So that's how that happened. But otherwise, I was teaching for years, directing, and then I finally, when friends said, come on, go back and do acting, I stopped teaching, and I went into, well, I didn't stop totally. I still was at NYU, Tisch School of the Arts. But I started acting again, and I acted in New York, and I had a very fortunate career there. But after only a few years, I was on Star Trek.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think a lot of people, well, at least I didn't until researching. I really didn't know a lot about your career as an educator. And it's very
people
fascinating.
Don't like to even talk about it. It's funny. It's like, press wants just the glamour of TV.
Yeah.
But teaching was one of my favorite things in my life, because young people are what's happening. They're our future, and so to see where their heads are and be able to inspire them in some way, and support them to have the confidence to do their own work, and again, hopefully try to change the world and not only worry about their career.
Would you consider that mentorship the highlight of being a teacher?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So you mentioned all of these nuances of human movement that you were observing early on. And having recently gone back and watched Labyrinth again, I can definitely tell why that would be so important.
Well, yeah. And again, you're in a different thing entirely. But, rhythm is the foundation of, it's like breath. And you really are aware of rhythm, and the rhythm that you turn your head in, the rhythm that a character breathes in, and all of that. And then you have technical things on top of that. For example, the first day we shot the first scene in Labyrinth, it was a very stressful day because I had been working on this first scene, and it was a little person, it was a dwarf, actually, who was playing Hoggle, and it was a female. And she was amazing. And she had, her hands were very tiny, so she had to use these fake, big, huge hands that she worked and had to build up her hand muscles so that she could, clinch the hands and stuff. And she had it perfect. But on the morning of the shoot, the first time, without telling me, they had put a camera in her head, the mask that she wore over. Well, the camera, and so we start doing it, and she goes the wrong direction. And George Lucas is on the set with Jim. And
wow.
Jim is like, what the hell? And, I could tell he was so pissed off. And I'm like, wow, she's never done that before. So we tried it again. She did it again. And then she's going, but I am going, look. And then they finally realize it's the camera was reversing right from left. Like when, and so that's why. And so once they realized, just don't do it with that, let her just do her stuff, she was fine. But things like that happen on a shoot, and you have so many people on the set, and it's thousands of dollars a minute, It's just crazy.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing that happens there.
At that point in your career, was it any nervousness of working with figures such as George Lucas, Jim Henson, and David Bowie on this movie in particular?
Well, George Lucas was just visiting because I think he was involved in some way financially, but I'm not positive of that. That's conjecture. But it was more that you don't have a full understanding. Like you're going, why did they choose me exactly? But it was like almost a year of my life. It was 9 full months of work. I think with David Bowie, he's one of the most extraordinary artists. But I think that I just put my head, I was so working at capacity, I really didn't have time to be a fangirl. And I regret that I didn't, because I would have loved to have actually been more of a fangirl. But it was not appropriate, and there were so many other things to do that, we hadn't yet shot the ballroom scene, and I was prepping for that. I was casting the dancers. There was just so much going on that it was quite a whirlwind, actually. So while I got to dance with him when I was stepping in for Jennifer, showing her what to do, which was really fun, I don't think I really took advantage of the extraordinary opportunity. And then afterwards, of course, I wish I had done that. He was one of the greatest down-to-earth people you could ever meet. Yeah, no, he was impressive. No question about it. Funny, did not take himself too seriously. He was cool. He was really cool and brilliant.
Awesome. So at any point I ask you a question you don't want to answer, just tell me, shut up, Clarence, and the famous...
Can I say that, like, shut up, Wesley?
Yes.
I can just go, shut up, Clarence?
Please, I would be so honored. I would be so honored. So I noticed in a lot of your early in choreography work, you used the name, or at least in IMDb, it's listed as Cheryl.
Cheryl. Yeah.
What's the distinction?
My full name is Cheryl Gates McFadden. That's my full name on the birth certificate, is Cheryl Gates McFadden. And, while my parents loved the name Cheryl, I was not so keen on it. First of all, Brits would always say Cheryl, which drove me crazy. When I was working with David Jones from the RSC, I was doing choreography for the Brooklyn Academy of Music Theater Company that he started, and it was like Cheryl, and I just like, oh, God, I hate that. But worse, when I was in middle school, although we didn't have middle school where I grew up, it was just 1st through 8th, and then you went to high school. There was a really mean girl that I didn't... Well, she probably wasn't as mean as I'm remembering, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But
she was so much bigger than me and everything. That was before I grew tall. I was really short for a long time. And then, boom, it just happened. So I had been, I had a nickname, Gates. My mother's maiden name was Gates. So I preferred it. And then there was another thing going on, which was I had been stalked when I had been teaching by some guy, and I didn't want my normal name. I didn't want it to be on broadcast everywhere around the world. So I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to change it now. And I did. And it was done like on a fast whim. But I think in retrospect, it really did have more to do with being stalked, because I was really scared of doing conventions even. I was like the last one to do conventions because I just didn't want this person to show up, because this was before stalking was enforced by the law. Mm-hmm. This is before that Rebecca Schaefer was murdered. And so, I had a bad experience at that time. Now there are laws, and there were, I think, by the time I did Star Trek, but I still was a little... Now I realize that should anything happen, if anyone would protect me, it would be my fans because they're the greatest.
Yeah. And I could definitely see that because once you're famous and your name is out there, there's always the crazies that, don't know where to draw the line. And so I completely see that.
It basically was because I'd had a 2-year experience about this, and it was really scary. So, yeah.
So I have a few Trek questions before we go on and talk about your new upcoming project. So what is something about your time on Trek that you would like people to know that you're not often asked?
Well, I'm not asked about how hard it was to, I was the first, other than Patrick, his youngest was 14 when we did the show, I think, and Daniel was about 17 or 18. He was in college. To have a baby and be the first one who dealt with that on our set, it was tough because we were doing long, long hours, and when I wanted to, nurse my baby, and it takes time. It takes 15, 20 minutes. And I remember people being so annoyed with me. And then, of course, later some of those same people had kids, and it was just like, hey, my wife's nursing, and people understand things. I mean, it's a normal thing, right?
Yeah.
They weren't doing it against me, but it was just, I remember that pressure of going back to my trailer, and my attention had to focus on my child, so it was like I was so tired.
Yeah.
And I know that this is a common thing. It really, so many women do it, but it just was a very particularly different time because you couldn't hang out. I wouldn't hang out and chat like I used to, with people. Like you really need to get back and be with your child and play with them. And my son was 3 by the time we started doing the movies. So that, I think, was something that was definitely a female experience. And I know later other people had it, but often their pregnancy was part of the show. And so it was, whereas mine, I had to hide it, and I just had, they didn't use me as much in episodes because of that. And I was sad because I had hoped that they would have used the pregnancy. It would have been great. They could have not said anything the whole time, and we don't know who the father is, and that could have been fascinating, But I think it was just too soon to do something like that. They got a lot more open to all sorts of issues about that sort of thing in the second series of like DS9 and Voyager and things like that.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I think Sonequa Martin Green was actually pregnant during filming the last season of Discovery.
She is amazing. I am so in awe of her. I think she's so just a dynamite actor and such a presence. And really, I don't know. I would love to get her on my podcast. She's extraordinary. But then she has 2 children. They're small, and so you're putting your extra time to that.
So how are Gates and Beverly Crusher similar or dissimilar?
Well, I think that's something that is hard to say, and you don't want to overdo what it is. I think I'm a lot crazier than Beverly Crusher, and I think I'm a lot. I do, much stranger, and more edgy. Than probably the character. I also like to think that I have a lot more humor than she was allowed to have. But then again, that's in the writing. I tried to play things, as well as I could. I know that I felt I'm a different. I have a son who's now going to be 30, and he and I, all of his life, we talked about all sorts of ethical issues and really important subjects and what he was working on and things like that. And that kind of relationship was not really shown with Crusher and Crusher, Wesley and Beverly. It was more, typical mom thing. And I think, because I've been a single parent for quite a few years, not all the time, but quite a few years, and you get a very close relationship, hopefully, with your child, and you talk about all kinds of things. And I was very disappointed that wasn't part of the character, that it was more like, shut up, Wesley, or you didn't do this. And I thought, well, because it would have been cool to know they obviously could have worked on something, developed something together, because my son and I do things like that all the time, and that's what's really fun. It's mentoring, you know? But on the other hand, I understood how he needed a male figure in his life, so that also makes sense and is crucial that, Wesley would be able to talk to the captain or to Riker or somebody, I think both should be there. So I would say those are the ways. But I think I'm just as good of a surgeon as she is.
Well, obviously.
I think that, because I've been doing it on weekends in the garage, and I think I think I'm there,
Oh, man. You're cracking me up over here. So, and I definitely, with my children, I try to be into the things they're into, if not just for it to show interest, then, have something to bond over and talk about. So I definitely get what you're saying there.
Yeah. And also, who made him so damn smart? Right? I mean, I guess it was Starfleet, but also it's some, you have to allow your children to really bloom, and go their direction. So anyway.
Yeah. So of your co-stars, who do you think is most like their on-screen counterparts?
Oh, God, I don't know. Look, they're all based, you do a character that long, parts of you come into it. There's just no question about it, okay? Yeah. So that happens. But probably Marina is the most unlike her character, I think. And then, of course, but then there are aspects that, I don't know. I think it's... But she would be the one who comes to mind. I think she would say that, too. She's the first one to say that. Now, let's talk about the podcast. Come on. It's
Yeah. So speaking of your co-stars, so let's get into the new podcast, Gates McFadden InvestiGates.
Yeah, it's just InvestiGates. Who do you think you are?
Yeah. Yes. So tell me about it. Why would Star Trek fans... other than obviously because you're on it, but why would they want to tune in? What is the show all about? You mean that's not
enough? Just that I'm on it?
That is completely enough for me, but
Well, okay, Clarence, let's get real. I didn't come up with the idea to, I've got to do this podcast, but it was during the pandemic, and the most wonderful man, Brian Volk-Weiss, who is the CEO of Nacelle, called me and said, hey, I would really love for you to, I'm a big fan. I've loved your character. I would really love for you to do a podcast that we would produce. And I'm like, no, there's no way. And he wanted it, I think, to be about Trek, or that's what he assumed it would be. And I said, the last thing on earth that my good friends in TNG want to talk about with me on a podcast is Star Trek. We have it every day from other fans and other blogs and, people who want to know that.
Yeah.
That's not what we sit and talk about. And then he said, well, then talk about anything you want, and I'm like, I don't know what I want to talk about. And I said, no, I don't think it's a great idea. And he came back a couple times. So I finally... on the third time, it was just like I went, okay, I'll do it. I mean, actually, a dog dared me to do it, and it's the truth. That's how I made the decision. My friend Tracy and Aida, they have a dog, Luna, and who was just adorable. But Luna would not even let me touch her. She was a rescue, and she was terrified, right? Mm-hmm. And she had. I'd seen the dog several times, but the dog would never let me pet her, and she was just shy away. She was sweet. And at the end of the conversation where I'm like, I don't know, you guys, what am I going to do this about? I guess I'd talk to my friends, and what would it be? And I said, okay, I'm letting Luna decide. So I got two dog biscuits. I put one in the right hand and one in the left hand. I said, if Luna takes the right hand, I'm not doing it. If she takes the left hand, I'm doing it. And I swear to God, I laughed so hard. The dog suddenly, as if the dog had understood, took like 3 full minutes, which is a long time, going from right to left, going right to left, and we thought she was going to say no, and then she grabbed the one in the hand that was left, and it was like, I said, well, I guess I'm doing the podcast, and that was really
that is so amazing.
And I mean, the thing is that the more I thought about it, I thought it could really be a blast. I mean, I think I was nervous in the beginning because I was like, having to be the host, I hadn't quite relaxed because I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about. I would do a lot of research on every person, mm-hmm. and obviously I couldn't get too intimate, but
Yeah.
I wanted it to not be the normal thing, and I wanted it to be a conversation. So every single one is different, and sometimes there are moments that are really serious, and then there are other moments that are totally silly. And then they I love everybody, and we really, I think what you get is how much we really care for each other. I mean, we laugh so much. Sometimes it's really hilarious, and sometimes it's really like, oh boy, But I'm hoping that fans learn a lot about these people. I really do love my friends, and I think it's one of the greatest things that has come out of the Star Trek world. I would say the first thing is just providing role models that are positive for so many people, so that they can grow up to become scientists and doctors and understand about inclusion and the perils of hatred and just thinking everything is like black and white. It's not.
Yeah.
There's just you have to be able to hold ambivalence and contradiction, because that exists in the world, and so you have to just keep a positive feeling. And Star Trek really, to me, I didn't get this at the time. It really took me years to grow into this understanding, but it does talk about a way of getting along,
Yes.
even if you disagree, and respecting people who you don't understand or you're not familiar with, and not just walling off out of fear or hatred or whatever, So I would say that, to me, is the most important thing about Star Trek. And then the second for me has been the friendships.
Yeah. A wonderful, extensive guest list of people you've worked with, of course. Jonathan Frakes, LeVar Burton, Will Wheaton, Brent Spiner, Marissa Ortiz, Michael Dorn, John Delancey, Robert Picardo, and so on. Just a wonderful...
And more, and more. I mean, I'm really... I learned how to sound edit, so that would take hours. And sometimes I had so much material that a couple, like Will Wheaton and I, we played games. We played all kinds of games, and I asked ethical questions. And I think people will learn a lot about, you learn a lot about us that you would never be talking about at a convention. So there's some really... It's a cool group of people. So the casting people did well. The producers really chose people who believe in it, and all the way through, like Discovery cast and Picard cast, it's kind of remarkable, that everyone does want the world to be more inclusive and people to be more tolerant and progressive, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So our time has flown by, and I want to be respectful of your time, but I just can't wait to subscribe, first of all, and
thank you.
Listen in to the podcast. Again, the name of that podcast is Gates McFadden InvestiGates. Who do you think you are? And the podcast will be available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast from, starting on May 12th. Ms. McFadden, this has been a pleasure, and I can't wait to listen. And thank you so much for your time.
I hope you like it. I hope you like it. Thank you so much, and you take care.
Thanks for listening to the Discussing Trek podcast. For more information, go to discussingtrek.com/subscribe.
You've been listening to the Discussing Network. Find out more at discussingnetwork.com.
Can I say that, like, shut up, Wesley? I can just go, shut up, Clarence?